Joining us now to break down these latest developments is Jenna Ellis, a constitutional law attorney and a senior legal advisor for the 2020 Trump campaign. Jenna, when we look at this latest scandal regarding the Flynn investigation, I mean, it's just one of many, but right now it seems like the narrative is around this phone call, the transcript of the phone call between Michael Flynn and the former Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. What would this transcript mean if it were to be released for not only Michael Flynn's case in particular, but the larger Russia investigation?
Well, I think that Americans absolutely want transparency and they want accountability for people who have very clearly undermined not only the Trump campaign initially, but then going into the transition period. And Americans deserve answers to these questions. And so just like how excellent it was to the impeachment hoax when President Trump decided to release his phone call transcript with Ukraine. I think that we'll see that same parallel, and the American people can look for themselves and say, was just a manipulated investigation from the beginning. This was a railroading of Michael Flynn, and it was trying to undermine the legitimacy of the Trump administration from the very beginning. And having answers to all of these questions, I think, Alex, is so incredibly important because we're saying this should never, ever be a partisan issue. Legitimacy in law enforcement, legitimacy in the peaceful transition of power, legitimacy in every aspect of government it should never, ever, ever be a matter of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. And so those people who are bad actors from the Obama administration absolutely deserve accountability, and they deserve to be brought to justice if, in fact, there were criminal actions to that conduct.
And just a refresher for our viewers, too, this conversation that we're talking about between Michael Flynn and the Russian ambassador took place after the election. It was during the transition period. And so in my eyes, unless Michael Flynn says on that phone call, we colluded with the Russians a couple months ago, this phone call really doesn't mean that much to me. It's just one kind of peg in this larger picture about this investigation that we're talking about, because then we can talk about George Papadopoulos. We can talk about the FISA renewals into Carter Page. There's so many more instruments that go into this that paint the larger picture of wrongdoing. So for many Republicans, they're a little bit tired of hearing the phrase, wait for the report, wait for the report. We can look back to Horowitz, we can look back to the other investigations, but is this Durham investigation the one that they should indeed be looking forward to?
I hope so. And you're right. Americans are really tired of just receiving what amounts to no more than HR reports and kind of we know that the FBI didn't do their job and, sucks for them. But then nothing really happens in terms of accountability. I think Americans want to see that law enforcement and the true interests of justice don't only go one way. And so that's why all of this unmasking motivation, that's why all of the release of these documents, that's why this investigation is so important to the American people, because as we're seeing the truth of the whole Russia collusion hoax come out, and we're seeing that there were so many bad actors in the Obama administration, and we're seeing the truth of what's behind this, then Americans want accountability. We understand the notions of fairness, of justice, and what law enforcement is supposed to do. And when our highest levels of government are manipulating the law enforcement, and they're manipulating the FISA system, and they are weaponizing these tools of government to turn it around on their own political opponents, that's the very thing that they should not be doing. And we went through an entire impeachment hoax based on them accusing President Trump of not doing anything that he was accused of. And yet they're trying to minimize when the truth comes out of them doing those exact same things that they tried to pin on President Trump. So Americans are tired of this just being a one-way street.
And I think when you say that this is more bipartisan than people give credit for, I think you're right, because when we look at the FISA bill that's currently making its way on Capitol Hill right now, it faced pushback not only from the more Trumpian type of conservatives who have seen this system abused in this latest investigation that we're talking about, but also from some progressive Democrats as well, who say that these are the type of police tactics that are used against minority populations all the time on an everyday basis, not just against the president. So I think those two sides are coming together and saying if this could be used against a high-level politician under the microscope, look at what it does for civil liberties in the big picture. Do you think that this FISA bill is something where the two sides will be able to come together and make real reforms, or is this something we're going to see a lot more of?
Well, I hope so. And, if Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer can put aside their partisan Democratic operative tactics and actually look at what's good for the American people and look at, in the context of FISA reforms, not reauthorizing a tool that has been so manipulated and abused, and we see that on the record without some accountability and reform, then I think that that's just going to show very clearly what the Democrat priorities are rather than what the Republicans, what President Trump. I mean, he was very clear that he was just going to veto this if it came through as written. And that's why they're having to go to this conference committee now to try to come together. I hope that they will, because this shouldn't be a Democrat or a Republican issue. This should be inherently an American one. And both sides need to recognize that. I think Trump has been absolutely wonderful in his leadership by being the president for all Americans, not just for the Americans that he tends to agree with. And so Democrats would be wise to take a cue from President Trump and actually come together in this conference committee and propose real reforms.
And things are starting to move fast, too. Whether we look at this Flynn case, we should be getting a response from Judge Sullivan in the coming days. Whether it's this FISA renewal bill that we're talking about, we should get some answers on that. And now we see this unmasking investigation that is being opened up. All that ahead of the Durham investigation. Things are starting to take form, and we should be getting some answers, at least in the coming days, if not weeks. Jenna Ellis, it's always a pleasure having you on. Thanks for breaking down this complicated topic for us.